Hey guys, tonight we're going to ease into the slow drip of time itself. You're standing in the bustling heart of 19th century Edo, the old name for Tokyo, but it's not quite like anything you've seen before. The air smells like tatami mats, soy sauce, and the distant temps of coal smoke. Lanterns swing gently from wood-framed storefronts, and geta sandals clack over stone. But above it all, somewhere out of sight, a strange machine is ticking not with gears and springs like a normal clock, but with water, gravity, and maybe a little magic. This is a world where 9 a.m. doesn't mean 9 o'clock at all. The hours shrink and stretch with the sun, and people don't mind. Time is soft here, like wet rice paper. But one Manan inventor with more patience than common sense has decided to pin it down to measure this liquid concept with a liquid device. What could go wrong? Well, everything, and also nothing, but we'll get to that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake by the end, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your walk just as the temple bells finish tolling. It's late afternoon in Edo, and the scent of grilled eel wafts through the alleyways. The people around you aren't exactly in a hurry. There are no wristwatches, no traffic lights, no buzzing phones, and most importantly, no idea what time it is in the way you're used to, because time here bends. In Edo period Japan, the day was divided into 12 segments, named after zodiac animals. But unlike the rigid 60-minute hours of the West, Japanese hours shifted. Literally, they were longer in summer and shorter in winter. Daylight hours and nighttime hours were always split evenly into 6 apiece, no matter how long or short the sun chose to stay. That meant a summer hour could stretch close to 90 minutes, while its winter twin shrank toward 45. It's less of a clock and more of a suggestion. Confused? You're not alone. Even Japanese folks at the time had to double-check sun positions to figure out when to boil tea or start prayers, but nobody seemed to fuss. They were living in what historians now call temporal fluidity, which sounds fancy but basically means time. Of course, some tried to keep up. Merchants used incense clocks, long coils of scented powder that burned at a predictable pace. Monks liked water clocks, where drips into a bowl signaled the passage of time, and rich samurai sometimes owned imported Western timepieces, mostly for decoration. These foreign clocks ticked in stubborn, unchanging hours, which made them about as useful as a chocolate teapot in a country where an hour was never the same twice. That's where things got interesting, because while most people just shrugged and went with the flow, one man didn't. His name was Hisashi Tanaka, and if you squint toward a quieter back alley, you can almost see him now, hunched over his workbench, eyes glinting, tools spread out like a sushi chef's knives. He wasn't like the other samurai. Sure, he could swing a sword, but he'd rather invent a mechanical dog that barks on command or a puppet that serves you tea and bows afterward. Quirky, yes. Brilliant, definitely. Socially normal, not so much. Tanaka was born in 1799 in Kurume, a castle town nestled in today's Fukuoka prefecture. He grew up in a time when Japan was still closed off from the world, a land of isolation and intense curiosity. By age 9, he was already dismantling lanterns to figure out how the hinges worked. By 14, he'd built his first karakuri, Ningyo, a mechanical doll that could pour sake. Parents were horrified. Artisans were intrigued. Tanaka, meanwhile, had already moved on to his next project. Time. Westerners had their clocks. The Chinese had their astronomical towers. But Tanaka looked at Japan's stretchy hours and thought, well, I can work with that. Most people would have laughed and gone back to lunch. Tanaka went into the mountains to study water pressure and gravitational pull. Historians still argue whether he was trying to fix Japanese time or just show off. But either way, his next creation would be like nothing else. Not quite a clock, not quite a sculpture, a little bit of both. And powered not by gears alone, but by water steady, slow, and unhurried, like the hours themselves. You're already feeling slower, aren't you? Imagine walking into his workshop. Wooden beams creak under your sandals. Paper screens glow amber in the afternoon light. There's a faint ticking, not sharp like a quartz clock, but rhythmic, dripping, like a leaky faucet in a cave. And in the center of it all sits a hulking thing nearly 7 feet tall, covered in brass and polished wood. A dragon curls around its base. Above, panels spin, dials twist, and water glistens as it runs through unseen tubes. It's called the Myriad Year Clock, and no one's ever seen anything quite like it. But don't get too close. Tanaka is still tuning it. He mutters to himself in numbers and sighs. When the left dial lags behind the right, you don't understand what any of it means. You just know that somehow, he is capturing time Japanese. Time in a machine that feels more alive than any alarm clock you've ever owned. Outside, the sun begins to set. Shadows stretch long, and the people of Edo, they're still not wearing watches. But if they listened very closely, they'd hear the gentle heartbeat of a strange, dripping invention trying to tell them what time it is even. If that time is always changing, you linger just a little longer in that creaky old workshop, letting the sound of dripping water and softly ticking wooden gears lull your brain into a slower rhythm. The air is warm and smells faintly of cedar and machine oil. Tanaka steps away from the hulking clock, eyes gleaming with the quiet pride of someone who has been building something insane for a decade and is just now realizing it actually works. But here, that's the thing that keeps bothering you. How does a clock run on time, when time itself can make up its mind? See, back in 19th century Japan, the very idea of an hour was slippery. The Japanese divided the day into 12 parts, not 24, and they were labeled with animal names from the zodiac: rat, ox, tiger, rabbit, and so on. They didn't start at midnight or noon, but at sunset and sunrise, both of which shifted constantly with the seasons. So rabbit hour in winter could be completely different from rabbit hour in summer. Sometimes it lasted 90 minutes, sometimes 45. Even the clocks had to adapt, or just quietly explode from the stress, which is exactly what happened when the Dutch arrived. Western mechanical clocks, those marvels with springs and pendulums, were based on the European concept of time. Rigid, symmetrical, and standardized. An hour was always 60 minutes. A minute was always 60 seconds. Predictable, boring, dependable, the kind of time you could build trains around. But in Japan, not so much. Imagine giving someone a brand new Rolex, only to have them say, it's not stretchy enough. That's what happened. These imported clocks started showing up in samurai homes and merchant offices, but they couldn't handle the fluctuating hours. Their hands marched on steadily while the actual hours wobbled like jelly. So local clockmakers did what any sensible, tea-loving artisan would do. They hacked the clocks. They started tweaking the gears. Some added extra cams and adjustable others built interchangeable plates, so you could swap out the timing for winter and summer. These hacked clocks, called Wadoke, were wildly complex, temperamental, and sort of adorable in their chaos. Owning one was like having a cat. Beautiful, occasionally accurate, and always doing its own thing. Still, they were limited. Mechanical springs had limits. Pendulums didn't swing properly if the ground shook, or if a curious raccoon knocked into them. So even with all the modifications, Wadoke struggled to match the elastic hours of Japanese life. Merchants overslept. Priests chanted too early. Samurai got grumpy. That's where water came in. Water clocks, or clepsydras, had been around for centuries. The Chinese had used them, so had the Greeks and the Egyptians. Basically, you fill a container with water and let it drip into another container, measuring time by how full it gets. Super simple. And crucially, it didn't care if the hours change, length adjust the flow rate or the markings, and you read back on track. Tanaka understood this, but he didn't just want a bowl of dripping water. He wanted drama, art, movement, emotion, something that didn't just tell time it, and unlike the average clock tinkerers of IDO, he didn't stop at good enough. Now you're restarting to understand why he built something 7 feet tall that took him several years and multiple nervous breakdowns to finish. But before we get back to that gigantic thing in the middle of the room, let's peek at how the regular folks dealt with all this. Most commoners couldn't afford fancy clocks. Instead, they listened. Temples rang bells 6 times a day to announce the passing hour. Firewatch towers clanged metal gongs to mark curfews, or signal the hour of the boar, or the ox. And street vendors, they went by gut feeling and how loud the cicadas were. One popular tool among the less mechanically inclined was the incense cloth. Think of a long stick of incense, laid flat inside a wooden box filled with carved pathways. As the incense burned along the maze, it marked the passage of time and sometimes, if you were lucky, released different scents along the way. Morning could smell like jasmine, afternoon like sandalwood, evening, maybe just plain ash. It was accurate too within a few minutes. Which, let's face it, is better than your phone when you're scrolling Instagram and forget what day it is. Meanwhile, back at the fancy end of society, a few elite clockmakers were still wrestling with Wadoke guts. Their challenge? Making a device whose inner workings changed with the seasons. Some added rotating gears that physically shifted the length of each hour segment throughout the year. Others, more ambitious, designed double-faced clocks, one for daytime, one for night, but no one quite cracked it until Tanaka stepped in with his buckets and tubes. Historians still argue whether Tanaka's design was truly original or just the ultimate remake. There's evidence he studied ancient Chinese water clocks, and maybe even took inspiration from European automata. But what no one debates is this. His clock worked, and it was beautiful. You picture him again, pacing slowly in that lantern-lit room, a whisper of steam rising from a teacup, his left hand gently adjusting a gear while his right writes down a new idea. He's not chasing minutes. he's sculpting them, molding time into something visible, audible, almost touchable. His invention wouldn't just measure time, it would respect it. Respect the way Japanese time felt, the way it flowed unevenly with the seasons, like a stream too lazy to care about your appointments. And when he finally unveiled it to the world, or at least to the handful of stunned apprentices and lords who got a piquet, didn't he? Just ticka performed. Panels rotated, bells chimed, dials shifted from long hours to short ones and back again, all by themselves. Water trickled gently through internal valves, powering every motion with the steady patience of a river. In a world where time was always changing, Tanaka had built something that changed with it. So as you step out of his workshop, the sky now a bruised lavender with dusk, you glance back at that ticking, dripping masterpiece, and feel a strange sense of calm. Because if time is going to be weird and wobbly, why shouldn't the clock be, too? You walk a little slower now, maybe because you're easing into the rhythm of Edo time, or maybe because it's just fun to imagine a world where rushing doesn't exist. The street lamps flicker to life, tiny oil flames behind cloudy paper, and the air grows heavier with night. Around you, shopkeepers are pulling in signs. Children chase each other with kites, even though it's far too dark for kites. And somewhere off in the distance, a gento bell tolls. Probably an hour, but who knows what kind. You're starting to see the problem. For all its charm, this loosey-goosey system of squishy hours makes things like schedules and appointments kind of a joke. And when you live in a country of mountains, mist, and ritual tea ceremonies, that must start at precisely the right moment. The right moment keeps changing, something eventually has to give. That something, for a while, was the clock itself. Imported Western clocks, while fashionable, simply weren't equipped for the time-morphing chaos of Edo, Japan. Built to obey the sacred 60-minute hour, they marched along stiffly, ticking away with Swiss smugness. But in Japan, where a day, hour and a night, hour could be wildly different lengths, this rigid behavior made them laughably inaccurate. At first, people just accepted the quirk. Wealthy households would own these expensive European clocks as status symbols. Knowing full well they were useless for actual timekeeping, they were like buying a sports car when you live on a goat path. Impressive, shiny, completely impractical. So, what do you do when you admire the mechanics of a thing? But no, it can survive in your world. If you're a Japanese craftsman, you do what's always worked. Adapt it, mess with it, and when that fails, build your own. Thus came the Wadake, Japan's homegrown clock. The name literally means Japanese clock, but it might as well mean clock that tries really, really hard. These weren't just timepieces, they were feats of stubborn optimism. To accommodate shifting hour lengths, some Wadake featured adjustable plates that could be manually repositioned every few weeks, sort of like updating your phone calendar by carving a new one out of wood. Others had dual faces or sliding mechanisms that altered the spacing of hour markers. Still others included two sets of gears, one for daytime, one for nighttime, and a complex method of switching between them based on the season. And they worked. Mostly as long as you were willing to fidget with them constantly, or hire a monk to do it for you. Historians still debate how widespread these clocks were, or whether they were mostly toys for rich nerds. But what's certain is that these early attempts set the stage for something far more ambitious. They showed it was possible to measure time the Japanese way, not just with gears and springs, but with cultural logic and a big dash of artistic defiance. Enter again Haizushish. Remember that 7-foot monster you saw earlier? The one that looked like a piece of mechanical theater with the soul of a Zen poem. It's time to zoom in on it now. The myriad-year clock, as Tanaka eventually called it, wasn't a modification. It wasn't a hacked Western timepiece, or a clunky compromise. It was something entirely new. Something designed from the ground up to breathe Japanese time. You stand in front of it again, head tilted up. There are 6 faces on this thing. 6. 1 for standard time, 1 for the Japanese hour system, 1 for the day of the week, another for the month, yet another for the moon phase, and just for Funa, rotating celestial globe that shows the position of the stars. Because why not? What's more, it adjusted automatically. No need to poke it or spin anything manually. Inside, water flowed through precisely calibrated tubes, its pressure changing subtly with each season. Weighted arms shifted hour markers without human help. Gears clicked softly as they accounted for the shortening days of autumn, or the lengthening sunlit hours of spring. This clock didn't just tell time, it understood it. And the best part? It ran for a year on a single wind. Let that sink in. One wind, 365 days. No batteries, no electricity, just water, gravity, and the kind of obsessive design you usually only see in birdhouses built by retired watchmakers. It was, in every sense, a miracle. But not a flashy miracle, the kind you had to sit with, watch, listen to, the kind of miracle that required patience. You'd never find it in Times Square, screaming out the seconds. No, It belonged in a quiet temple or behind a folding screen. It was a whisper of time, not a shout. Of course, not everyone got it. When Tanaka presented his invention, some officials were politely baffled. Others were quietly impressed but unsure what to do with it. It wasn't exactly practical. It didn't ring bells for the public or chime for passing monks. It didn't scream efficiency or modernization. It was just accurate in a weird, watery, seasonal way. Beautiful. Yes. Useful. That was still up for debate. But for Tanaka, that wasn't the point. He wasn't trying to build a mass-market product. He was trying to make time feel right. To embody the way Japanese life flowed not in tic-tacs, but in breaths, in shadows, in cups of tea cooling slowly by the window. Even now, historians puzzle over how it worked. The original blueprints are gone. All that's left is the actual clock restored, delicate and mysterious as ever. Engineers today still argue about the precise valve mechanics. Some claim he must have used a hybrid weight-water system. Others swear there were hidden levers, or even primitive thermostats to regulate flow based on temperature. He didn't leave footnotes. He let the clock do the talking, and when you listen closely to its gentle rhythm when you let your own breath slow, too much it starts to sound like something familiar. Not a machine, not a countdown. Time, soft, uneven, and perfectly human. You pull up a floor cushion in the corner of the workshop, the soft tatami mat rustling beneath you, the myriad-year clock towers nearby, humming with quiet dignity. You can't help but be a little in awe and a little confused. How did one man even think of this thing, let alone build it with nothing more than paper diagrams, hand-forged metal, and infinite patience? The answer, of course, is that Hisashich Tanaka was not a normal man. He was what you might gently call a character. Born into a samurai family in 1799, Tanaka was expected to follow the usual path: study the sword, recite your Confucian virtues, not a lot at your superiors, maybe get into light poetry if things got wild. But by age 9, he was already gutting lamps to see how they worked. By 12, he was obsessed with springs and pulleys. And by 15, he had built a puppet that poured tea with the grace of a butler who'd attended finishing school. People in his village weren't sure what to do with him. He was polite, sure, talented, no doubt, but also odd. That kid who starts building a wind-powered toothbrush just to prove he can? That was Tanaka. He quickly became a master of karakuri, ningyo, traditional Japanese automata. These weren't just toys. They were miniature, mechanical performers. Some walked, some danced, some served tea, and when they reached you, bowed gently and waited for you to finish before turning around to leave. They were charming, slightly eerie, and proof that the line between engineering and performance art was very, very thin. And Tanaka didn't stop at dolls. He designed ink-writing robots, miniature theaters, and elaborate clocks that rang chimes and moved zodiac animals in little parades. Every creation had the same signature, delight wrapped in precision. But here's where it gets interesting. Unlike many tinkerers of the time, Tanaka wasn't working in isolation. He was doing all this in the context of Edo Japan, a society that prized subtlety, patience, and showmanship in equal measure. In a way, he was the perfect product of his environment. Think about it. This was a culture where a tea ceremony could take hours, and the precise way you folded a napkin mattered more than what was actually in the teacup. Tanaka didn't just invent machines. Historians still argue whether Tanaka was a true polymath or just someone who couldn't sit still. There are conflicting accounts of his early education. Some say he studied Western mechanical treatises, smuggled in from Dutch traders at Nagasaki. Others insist he was self-taught, learning from temple clocks and intuition. The truth is probably somewhere in between. What we do know is that by his 30s, he was recognized as a genius. The kind of genius who'd forget to eat because he was busy soldering a gear the size of a grain of rice. Eventually, he moved from Kurum to Osaka, and finally, to Edo, bringing with him boxes of tools, models, and sketches. He didn't just carry ideas, he carried plans. And somewhere along the way, he started sketching out the foundations of what would become the myriad-year clock. Why a clock? Well, no one really knows. Some say he was frustrated by the clunky performance of the existing Wadoke. Others think he was obsessed with the philosophical idea of time itself. Or maybe he looked at the seasonal nature of Japanese timekeeping and thought, there must be a more beautiful way to do this. Let's be clear, this was no simple feat. The myriad-year clock was not some weekend project. It required years of trial and error. Water pressure had to be consistent but adaptable. Gears had to be custom-milled by hand. The whole thing had to be able to function not just over hours, but over seasons, shifting as the sun did, adjusting for the gradual dance of daylight and darkness. Tanaka built much of it himself, which means that while most people were out watching kabuki plays or planting rice, he was hunched over tiny brass parts with tweezers and magnifying glasses, muttering things like, this camshaft isn't emotionally balanced enough. And somehow, despite the odds, he did it. By the mid-1850s, the myriad-year clock was complete. It stood taller than a person, weighed several hundred pounds, and looked like a cross between a Buddhist altar and a spaceship. On the front, 6 tiles spun, in quiet harmony. On the back, a hidden system of water chambers and weights ensured the entire thing ticked smoothly for an entire year on one winding. This wasn't just a feat of mechanics. It was a philosophy. Tanaka didn't just build a clock, he built time, the way he believed it should be. Seasonal, soft, responsive, and poetic. And yet for all its grandeur, the myriad-year clock wasn't for mass production. It was a one-of-a-kind masterpiece. No schematics were ever published, no instructions passed down. Tanaka made it to exist, not to replicate. You glance at it again, wondering how it's still standing. After all, it's over 160 years old. How many gadgets do you own that'll last even 10? Today, the original clock is housed in the National Museum of Nature and Science in Tokyo, lovingly restored and quietly ticking away behind glass. Visitors stare in awe, engineers scratch their heads, and children press their noses to the display case. It's mesmerizing and oddly soothing. And yet, even now, parts of its design remain mysterious. Historians and horologists still argue over how some of the internal balancing valves worked. No blueprints survive. It's like a mechanical haiku. Precise, beautiful, and just vague enough to stay interesting forever. So, as you sit there beside Tanaka's ticking dream, you might feel your own pulse slowed just a little. Because this wasn't just about minutes and hours. It was about rhythm, about building a machine that didn't fight nature but flowed with it. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of time we should be keeping all along? The room is quieter now. The kind of quiet that only settles in when the world has stopped rushing. You can almost hear the floorboards sigh beneath you. The candle's flame wavers gently as the myriad-year clock continues its soft, dripping performance. It's time to get a closer look not just at the clock's face, but at what's going on inside. Let's talk water. Not the kind you drink. Not even the kind you splash through in a hot spring. No. This water has a Japan extremely important one. It has to move through a maze of copper tubes and secret chambers with exactly the right rhythm, or else the entire timekeeping system falls apart. The myriad-year clock was designed with what engineers today call a hydrostatic drive. That's a fancy way of saying water moves through the device at a controlled pace, and that movement helps regulate everything from gears to chimes to hour hands. Except this wasn't a modern pump or pressurized system. This was 19th century wizardry, a balancing act of gravity, friction, and precise craftsmanship. Now imagine this. Somewhere inside the clock's tall wooden frame, water is held in a reservoir, probably at the top. As gravity pulls it downward, it flows through valves and onto a weighted scoop or counterbalance. This motion either winds a gear or shifts a mechanism, perhaps turning one of the 6 dials ever so slightly. And that's only one of the functions. It gets even better. This water system didn't just run blindly. It adapted. When the seasons changed and daylight hours grew longer or shorter, the water's flow was subtly redirected by weighted levers and pressure balancing valves. These weren't just mechanisms, they were musical instruments playing the song of the seasons, one drop at a time. Historians still argue whether Tanaka created the valve design himself or borrowed ancient principles from Chinese clepsydizerly water clocks that had been used in East Asia since the Han Dynasty. But none of those were this complex, and certainly none of them adjusted automatically to seasonal shifts without manual tweaking. That's why modern engineers still squint at blueprints and whisper, "How did he do this?" Now take a closer look at those gears. Not all of them spin in regular circles. Some follow elliptical paths, designed to simulate the changing arc of the sun through the sky. The hour hand OSNT just march forward in tidy steps. It stretches and shrinks its intervals depending on whether it is a summer morning or a winter night. The daylight hours lengthen, the nighttime ones compress, all reflected in the movement of the gears. It's not a bug, it's the whole point. One of the most mesmerizing parts? The dial that tracks the lunar phase. Imagine a tiny sphere inside the clock, half black, half silver, rotating gradually to match the moon in the sky. Tanaka included that not because it was necessary, but because it was beautiful. Like a little celestial nod, 2 times older cousin. Meanwhile, a bell chimes softly on the hour. Not every hour, only the ones it's supposed to. Some days, it chimes 6 times. Others, 7. It depends on the calendar, the phase of the moon, and sometimes, it seems, the mood of the machine itself. This isn't a clock for the impatient. It is a companion for people who understand that. Time ISNT, a straight line it, SA spiral. Here's a strange detail. Some scholars believe the clock even incorporated a humidity regulator. That's right. A tiny wooden panel, sensitive to moisture, would subtly expand or contract, adjusting airflow to ensure the water pressure stayed consistent, even when the air grew muggy. During Japan's rainy season. Is it confirmed? Not quite. But it would be very on brand for Tanaka. Now, let's get weird for a moment. There's a theory floating around admittedly fringe that the myriad-year clock was more than just a timepiece. Some say Tanaka built it as a secret philosophical statement, an argument in metal and wood against the coming wave of Western industrialization. The clock doesn't follow universal time. It follows Japanese time, local time, human time, time that breathes and bows and blushes. It doesn't count seconds. It honors moments. That's probably why it never went into production. It wasn't designed for factories or timetables. It was designed for stillness, for people who measured their day not by deadlines, but by shadows on paper screens. Of course, not everyone appreciated that. As the Meiji era crept in, Japan started importing railroads, telegrams, and yes, suddenly, being on time wasn't a charming suggestion. It was a national necessity. Tanaka saw it coming, and while he eventually embraced the future, this clock was his love letter to the past. His final ode to the rhythms of a culture that didn't need wristwatches to know when to breathe. You watch as the moon dial shifts, a hair's breadth. The water level inside the chamber drops by just a sip, a weight resets, silent and unseen. No buzzing alarms, no flashing lights, just the quiet motion of a device that's alive in its own way. And then it hits you. This clock isn't trying to show you the time, it's trying to teach you how to feel it. You stay seated, almost unconsciously, as the clock shifts once more. A small wooden pin moves. A brass plate slides like a leaf in a breeze. Somewhere deep within the cabinet, a droplet of water slips into the next basin. The effect is hypnotic. It's like watching a forest grow so slow, so subtle, that you don't realize anything's changed until you blink, and it has. Then a soft chime, just one. Not loud, not urgent. It's the sound of time passing with a shrug. This was Tanaka's intention, and you're restarting to feel the pull of it now, this different way of experiencing minutes and hours. Not as measurements, but as moods. But Tanaka didn't build all this just to make you sleepy. The real brilliance of the myriad-year clock lies in what it shows as well as what it sounds like. With its 6 synchronized faces, the clock wasn't just about telling time, it was about showing it. Picture the front panel. One dial displays the unequal hour system, where daylight and nighttime are divided into 6 chunks each, regardless of season. In summer, those daylight hours stretch wide and long. In winter, they scrunch up like a cold cat. The dial responds accordingly, shifting to match the length of the sunlit day, almost like a mechanical sundial on autopilot. Beside it, another dial shows the phases of the moon. Next to that, a weekday dial, probably adorned with kanji for each day, turns with the patience of a monk. There's even a calendar dial for the solar months. And, believe it or not, one for zodiac years, a reminder that time is not just a straight road but a wheel, forever circling back on itself. And then there's the chime mechanism. It doesn't just ding like a normal clock. Each bell strike has a slightly different tone, chosen deliberately. According to some accounts, Tanaka tuned them using hollow bronze cups of varying depths. The result? A soft musical progression, never harsh, never jarring, just a kind of whispered lullaby from the inner world of gears and water. Imagine standing in that room as the clock marks one of the longer summer hours. You see the daylight dial stretch into a wide arc. You hear a double chime, one for the moment just past, one for the moment arriving. On the moon dial, a silver sphere shifts from half to full. The celestial globe rotates minutely to reflect the new star's rise over the eastern sky. The whole thing feels alive. Not like a machine, but like a garden that just happens to tell you what time it is. Historians still debate just how precisely the myriad-year clock tracked time. Some claim it could stay accurate too within a few minutes. Over an entire month, a remarkable feat, considering it was running on dripping water and woodbush gears. Others argue it was never meant to be precise, in a modern sense, only intuitively correct, a reflection of the way time was felt, not enforced. That's a concept Westerners struggle with. We like time to be bossy, to divide life into calendar invites and 3-minute microwave intervals. But this is time as something you can observe without needing to obey it. One particularly charming quirk. The myriad-year clock's hour indicators weren't always numbers. Some early sketches suggest Tanaka experimented with using symbols, seasonal flowers, animal signs, or phases of the sun's journey across the sky. Why? Because, again, he wasn't just marking when something was, but how it felt. Noon in summer has a different soul than noon in winter. He wanted the clock to show that. And guess what? It did. It showed the changing hour lengths with little wooden sliders that moved daily. It illustrated the cycle of seasons with rotating discs. Even the layout of the clocks, the visual design flowed from left to right, in the same gentle arc as a Japanese folding screen, like a panoramic story told in quiet motion. And Tanaka didn't stop there. He added tiny decorative touches: engraved plum blossoms, etched clouds, lacquered surfaces that caught the candlelight just so. The artistry was equal to the engineering. The whole thing wasn't just functional, it was contemplative. You're starting to get it now. This clock wasn't made to organize your day. It was made to slow it down, to remind you that the world doesn't tick forward in rigid steps. It flows. It stretches and shrinks, It brightens and darkens. It waxes and wanes like the moon on that dial. It breathes, and so should you. Which is why it's so easy to lose track of time sitting beside it. Funny, isn't it? A machine built to track time is the very thing making you forget it. That's the paradox. Tanaka captured a mechanism that runs like a machine, but feels like a meditation. And in that spirit, as the candle near you burns just a little shorter, and the air grows stiller, you realize something. The myriad-year clock doesn't really tell time. It invites you to experience it. You lean back a little now, your shoulders loosening, your breath sinking almost involuntarily with the faint rhythm of that clock. Each drop of water feels like a soft exhale. You wonder if that's what Tanaka had in mind, not just a timekeeping device, but a device that gently taught people how to exist in time, to fully appreciate how strange and wonderful this invention was. You need to understand something about the culture it came from, because Japan didn't leap straight from sundials to smartphones. No, it had a long and peculiar love affair with automata. Mechanical dolls. Karakuri ning. Yes, you heard that right. While European engineers were building cannons and Edo period artisans were designing dolls that could serve UT and bow afterward. Some could shoot arrows. One even stood up, walked forward a few paces, offered a cup, waited until you took it, and then quietly returned to where it started. The technology behind these puppets, springs, weights, cams, tiny bits of whalebone and silkstring. No electricity, no batteries, just beautifully balanced physics, and a lot of trial and error. These weren't toys, they were theater, and people loved them. Imagine a traveling show where, instead of jugglers or acrobats, you watched a tiny wooden archer hit a bullseye using only gravity and gears. That was peak entertainment in 1800s Japan. Not because people thought the puppets were alive, but because they marveled at the illusion of life inside wooden wire. That's the spirit Tanaka came out of. The spirit of engineering, not just as utility, but as delight. A sense that machines could be beautiful not just in how they looked, but in how they moved. So when Tanaka built his myriad-year clock, he wasn't just making a timepiece, he was crafting a performance. Every tick, every chime, every drip of water wasn't merely a function, it was part of a show. And let's be honest, people in Edo weren't exactly checking their calendars every 5 minutes. Time, as they knew it, was tied to rhythm of seasons, of prayers, of meals, and rest. You knew it was the third hour of the horse, because the light looked a certain way, and the temple bell had rung a certain number of times. Tanaka's clock mirrored that thinking. It displayed time, performed it. Not for productivity, but for presence. There's a famous tea-serving automaton, one of Tanaka's earliest creations. You'd set it at one end of the table, place a tiny porcelain teacup in its wooden hands, and wind a small gear hidden in its chest. The doll would then shuffle forward, slowly and deliberately. It bowed. You took the tea. It bowed again. Then, if you returned the empty cup, it turned around and walked back to where it started. It didn't speak. It didn't beep. It had dignity. And that same dignity lived inside the myriad-year clock. There was no flashing light or jangling bell, no reminders or timers. Just slow, deliberate motion. A dial turning to mark the moon. A soft chime, signaling twilight. A delicate balance of water and weight, measuring the hours, true length, whatever that might be today. Historians still argue whether the clock was meant for personal use, ceremonial display, or as a gift to the shogunate. It was likely a little of all three. But what's certain is that Tanaka was drawing from a centuries-old tradition of kinetic wonder. In his mind, machines could be companions, guides, gentle teachers of rhythm. That's a far cry from the clocks we know now. They're loud, demanding, they make you answer to time. Tanaka's, it just existed with you, like a quiet friend in the room, always aware, never intrusive. Even now, some modern engineers who study the clock admit to getting a little emotional, not just because of its complexity, but because of its intent. It wasn't trying to fix your life. It wasn't trying to be efficient. It was trying to be honest, to mirror the way time actually feels, not how we wish it would behave. You glance again at the rotating face showing the unequal hours. One segment is wide, now Zansets, stretch, and the one after it is narrowing. The clock doesn't judge. It just reflects. Back in the Edo period, this kind of mechanical sensitivity would have been seen as deeply harmonious, even spiritual. After all, Shinto and Buddhist beliefs often speak of impermanence, of the changing nature of all things. Tanaka's clock didn't fight that. It embraced it, made it audible, made it visible. One scholar once said that the myriad-year clock was Senti just marking time, it was meditating on it. And honestly, that tracks. Even now, as you sit beside its gentle mechanisms, you feel yourself adjusting. Your sense of urgency, drifting, not softened, like mist over a quiet garden. And maybe that's the secret behind Tanaka's true brilliance. Not that he engineered something few could understand, but that he understood something few tried to engineer. The candle beside you has burned lower, its golden pool of wax growing wide and sleepy. The air is heavier now, the hush of the room deepened by the subtle ticking, gliding soul of the myriad-year clock. You're not sure how long you've been sitting here, watching time happen instead of chasing it. Which, honestly, might be the most Tanaka-appropriate thing you've done all day. But let's pull back for a moment. This clock, this astonishing creature of water, wood, brass, and belief did not emerge from a vacuum. It came at the tail end of an era, right as Japan was about to crack open its centuries closed doors and get hit in the face with the industrial fire. That was Western modernization. And with that came something Tanaka probably hated: standardized time. Now, up until the mid-1800s, the Japanese hour system with its squishy, seasonal blocks of 6 daytime hours and 6 nighttime hours was just how things worked. Everyone accepted that sunrise and sunset didn't show up on cue, and neither should the hours that followed them. But all that started to change when Commodore Matthew Perry and his black ships arrived in hauling gifts, cannons, and a pocket watch that ticked like it ruled the world. Western timekeeping came with trains, with telegraphs, with timetables printed in neat little columns. Suddenly, there were schedules to keep, bells to ring on the dot, ships to dock at precise moments. An hour was now 60 minutes, always, everywhere. No seasonal breathing allowed. And here's where it gets juicy. Historians still argue whether Tanaka felt betrayed by this shift or merely intrigued, because while he loved old rhythms and intricate seasonal mechanisms, he also wasn't exactly allergic to change. In fact, after creating the myriad-year clock, he went on to found Tanaka, a manufacturing company that surprised Twist would eventually become Toshiba. Yes, that Toshiba. So the man who built the most spiritual, poetic, non-standard timekeeping device in Japanese history also helped lay the foundation for a company that would eventually produce washing machines, laptops, and LED light bulbs. Did Tanaka sell out? Not quite. It's more accurate to say he evolved. When Meiji-era Japan started embracing Western science and industry with wild-eyed enthusiasm, Tanaka pivoted right along with it. He began designing telegraphs, steam engines, and electrical devices. His workshop went from looking like a temple of time to something closer to a Tesla showroom with gears replaced by volt. And yet, he never disowned the myriad-year clock. He didn't hide it in a closet or pretend it hadn't happened. It remained a centerpiece of his legacy, a quiet echo from a world that was already fading. That duality of Tanaka, the artisan, and Tanaka, the industrialist, is part of what makes this story so human. Because don't we all feel that tension? The tug between slowing down and speeding up? Between holding on and catching up? 1 minute you're sipping tea beside a water-powered clock that size at the seasons. And the next, you're re-stuck in traffic, yelling at a glowing rectangle on your dashboard for being 2 minutes off schedule. Progress doesn't erase longing, overlays it. But back to the clock. Even after Japan fully adopted Western time in the late 19th century, switching to a 24-hour system with equal hour stay, Tanaka's myriad-year clock didn't lose its charm. If anything, it became more precious. A relic? Yes, but not just of timekeeping. Of how time once felt. Of a worldview that accepted impermanence, not as an error, but as the design. And despite all odds, the clock survived. It passed through hands, some reverent, some oblivious. It narrowly avoided being dismantled during the early 20th century, when many viewed such relics as quaint. It even made it through World War II, a time when Tokyo was heavily bombed and countless historical artifacts vanished forever. Yet somehow, this enormous, water-powered whisper of an era endured. And eventually it found a home in the National Museum of Nature and Science, where it was painstakingly restored to full working condition. Today, it still runs. Gently, quietly, patiently. Visitors gather around it, watching the dials rotate, the moon wax and wane, the seasons tick forward with water as their pulse. And for a few minutes or more, if they re-lucky, they forget that their phone is buzzing in their pocket, or that they re-5 minutes late. For whatever comes next, they just breathe. There's something powerful about that, something radical. In a world obsessed with acceleration, the myriad-year clock reminds us that slowness is not laziness. It's presence, awareness, respect. And Tanaka, well, he left us both. He gave us a glimpse of the past of bells and puppets and seasonal hours on, then helped usher in the electric future. He didn't choose one over the other. He danced between them, gear by gear, drop by drop. So as you sit there, candle barely clinging to its wick, watching the slow choreography of time, you realize that the myriad-year clock isn't asking you to rewind. It's simply inviting you to notice. The clock's soft ticking fades into the background of your mind, blending with the distant sounds of a city that's long since gone to sleep. You realize you've been holding your breath. You exhale slowly, sensing with the rhythm of that ancient water flow, as if the clock's heartbeat has somehow become your own. Let us take a moment to consider the broader impact of Tanaka's work, not just on clocks, but on the relationship between tradition and innovation in Japan's rapid modernization. When Japan's doors finally opened in the 1850s, the country underwent a whirlwind transformation. The Meiji Restoration wasn't just political. It was cultural, industrial, and deeply personal. Suddenly, centuries-old ways were challenged, replaced, or rushed aside to make way for railroads, factories, and telegraphs? Tanaka was part of this tidal wave, but his approach was unique. He never abandoned craftsmanship for mass production. Instead, he straddled both worlds. He was a master of monozukuri, the art and spirit of making things with dedication, precision, and pride. In fact, some scholars argue that Tanaka's blending of artisan tradition with industrial engineering helped set a foundation for Japan's later reputation as a leader in manufacturing quality. His early work with automata and clocks instilled in him a respect for detail that carried over into his company's telegraph and electric machinery production. But there's more. Tanaka's clock was a metaphor, one that reflected a tension Japan continues to navigate. How do you modernize without losing your soul? How do you run on electric currents without forgetting the flow of water? Historians still debate whether the myriad-year clock was a nostalgic relic or a bold step forward. Was it a way to hold on to a vanishing past, or a bridge to a future where precision and poetry could coexist? Whatever the answer, it reminds you that technology isn't just about utility. It's about values, rhythms, and the stories we tell ourselves about time and progress. And speaking of stories, did you know Tanaka was sometimes called Japan's Edison? Not because he was flashy or relentless, but because, like Edison, he was prolific and deeply curious. He held dozens of patents, ranging from steam engines to electric telegraphs, but unlike Edison's infamous work ethic of relentless hustle, Tanaka's creations always had a poetic flair. His industrial machines carried a signature. There's a famous anecdote where Tanaka was asked to build a telegraph receiver for the government. Instead of just making it work, he designed it so that the needle-less movement looked like a graceful dance, or a subtle reminder that even the most functional machines could have soul. This fusion of art and engineering echoes in the myriad-year clock's every tick. It wasn't just about counting time, it was about embodying the flow of life itself. And here's a quirky tidbit. During the clock's restoration in the late 20th century, conservators discovered tiny fingerprints in the lacquer and wood, almost as if had left secret signatures not just in ink but in touch. A reminder that every gear was handy assembled, every joint hand-fitted, with care and intention. It's the human touch that makes this clock so much more than a machine. It's a legacy of patience and wonder. So, as you sit with this story, you might start to wonder, what would it be like to live by a clock that changes its pace with the seasons? To honor the lunar phases and the length of daylight as sacred rhythms instead of annoyances. Maybe it's not about the clock itself. Maybe it's about what the clock asks of us. To slow down, to notice, to accept change, to find beauty and as you close your eyes tonight, maybe you'll hear the soft drip of water somewhere in the dark, marking not just minutes, but moments, soft, uneven, perfectly human moments. The gentle drip of water from the clock fades into your imagination, like a slow rain on a wooden roof. You feel the weight of centuries pressing softly against your eyelids, tempting you toward dreams, but before you drift too far, let's talk about how this mechanical marvel fit into the world around it. You see, Edo period Japan was a place where time was felt, not enforced, a world without the incessant urgency you might be used to today. Towns buzzed with merchants calling out wares, but their schedules flowed with the rhythm of the sun, not a stopwatch. Temples marked prayer times with bell tolls, not harsh alarms. Seasons mattered deeply, shaping festivals, planting cycles, even the way people dressed and lived. In such a world, a clock like Tanaka's wasn't just a device, it was a cultural statement. It respected the fluidity of natural time and embodied the Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in impermanence and imperfection. The myriad-year clock was a kinetic poem, celebrating the shifting dance of sun, moon, and water. Yet, this clock also lived on the cusp of great change. The Meiji Restoration would soon sweep Japan into the modern world, imposing standardized hours and Western timekeeping systems that made Tanaka's fluid measures seem quaint, if not obsolete. Factories demanded precise shifts. Railways needed punctuality. The country's heartbeat shifted from a slow, seasonal pulse to a mechanical metronome. Tanaka himself embraced this new era. He transitioned from making poetic clocks to manufacturing telegraphs and steam engines. His company would evolve into Toshiba, a global technology titan. But the spirit of the myriad year clock, the harmony of precision and poetry, never truly disappeared. Today, the clock stands as a reminder that time is not just a number but a feeling, a story, a dance. It invites you to question your own relationship with the relentless tick-tock of modern life. Maybe, just maybe, there's room to breathe, too slow, to sync with the natural rhythms that Tanaka so beautifully captured. And as your eyes grow heavy, the image of water trickling through brass pipes, the soft chime marking unequal hours, and the quiet turning of celestial spheres lingers in your Minda lullaby from a time when time itself was an art. Sleep well, friend. The clock is still ticking, softly, somewhere deep in the heart of Tokyo, waiting for the next moment to remind you to breathe. You're floating now, somewhere between the rhythmic drip of the myriad-year clock and the slow turning of the seasons it so delicately measures. The candle's glow flickers low, casting long shadows that dance gently across the walls. Just like the clock's hands stretch and shrink to match the length of the day. But there is one piece of the story we haven't touched on, yet Sathina might surprise you. You see, Tanaka's invention was not just a marvel of engineering and art, it was a symbol of resilience. Because Japan's history is littered with clocks and timepieces that simply didn't survive the tides of changed natural disasters. Wars and cultural shifts swept many mechanical wonders away. The myriad-year clock's survival is almost miraculous. When the great earthquake struck Edo in the 19th century, many temples, workshops, and homes were reduced to rubble. Many clocks, with their delicate parts, shattered or vanished. Yet, Tanaka's masterpiece endured. Some speculate it was kept safe in a trusted scholar's home, others say it was hidden away in a temple storage room. And during World War II, Tokyo's bombing campaigns obliterated much of the city's historical fabric. It's astonishing that this clock survived that chaos. Historians still debate how it avoided destruction. Was it pure luck, the care of devoted keepers, or perhaps because the clock's quiet presence was appreciated even in dark times? Maybe all of the above. The survival adds a layer of poignancy to the story. The clock is not just about timekeeping, it's a witness, a silent storyteller who's ticked through tumult and calm alike. Imagine, for a moment, the hands that wound the clock over the centuries. The samurai who once stood nearby, awed by its precision. The merchants who paused their day to watch the moon dial shift. The scientists and historians who restored its gears, marveling at its secrets. Each of them connected, in some small way, by this shared experience of time. And here's a quirky fact. In its restoration, conservators discovered a tiny, almost invisible engraving on one of the clock's gears, a small chrysanthemum. That's Japan's imperial flower, a symbol of endurance and rebirth. It's almost as if Tanaka left a hidden message. This clock will endure. That sense of continuity might explain why the myriad-year clock still feels alive today. It's not just a machine. It's a link between past and present, between human hands and the slow flow of nature. So next time you glance at your watch or phone, remember that somewhere, in a quiet museum, a clock ticks differently. It breathes with the seasons. It measures moments, not minutes. And it carries the heartbeat of centuries. And as your eyelids grow heavier, you might just find yourself sensing your own pulse to that rhythm, a gentle reminder that time is not just what passed, but what we live. The hour grows late, though. The myriad-year clock, in its gentle way, might suggest that late is just a matter of lighting and moon phase, not a number stamped on a screen. You feel the air shift ever so slightly, as if the clock itself knows you, re-slipping deeper into the stillness. And now, let us peek behind the curtain one last time and explore what is perhaps the most astonishing part of the clock's story: how little we truly understand it, even today. Despite detailed analysis, precise photography, and modern computer modeling, parts of the myriad-year clock still puzzle even expert horologists. Some of its internal regulators don't behave in predictable ways. Its time-adjusting mechanisms sometimes compensate for daylight shifts with such elegance that no one is entirely sure how. It's as if the clock has its own logic, subtle, secret, and stubborn. Historians still argue whether Tanaka built certain features based on empirical observation or mathematical foresight. Did he calculate the balance of daylight across seasons with formulas? Or did he sit in the same spot day after day, watching shadows move across paper walls, and simply feel his way to precision? There are no surviving schematics for the clock, no notebooks of his process. The only map to its inner workings is the clock itself, and, even then, it keeps some of its story hidden, like an elderly storyteller who only reveals the juiciest parts once you've earned them. One theory, Tanaka intentionally avoided full documentation, that he wanted the clock to retain an element of mystery as a safeguard against reduction. Not everything, he believed, needed to be solved. Some things should simply be experienced. That might be why modern engineers, with all their laser tools and digital calipers, still find themselves whispering in awe around the clock. It's not just about its age or survival. It's the feeling it gives, a quiet sense that you're standing next to a living philosophy, not just a pile of gears and tubes. Let's not forget the role of water either. Water, which never rushes, never hurries, but always gets where it's going. It's the perfect medium for a device meant to reflect seasonal time. And unlike steel or quartz, it changes. It evaporates. It adjusts to temperature. It can be disturbed by the lightest breath or flow on, unfazed, through decades. Tanaka chose it not just for function, but for meaning. There's an almost spiritual elegance in that choice. Water has long been revered in Japanese tradition, not just for its cleansing qualities, but as a metaphor for adaptability and inner calm. Ashishiadoshi uses the same basic principle. Fill, tip, empty, reset. Not for productivity, but for presence. So Tanaka's timekeeping wasn't just mechanical, it was meditative. And the more time you spend with this clock, the more you begin to notice things. Like how your own modern clocks never pause, never breathe, never adjust for cloudy days or the lazy arc of a long summer afternoon. They march forward, unforgiven. But Tanaka's clock, it listens. It watches the light, the moon, the breath of the errand. It responds. A gear shifts here, a valve adjusts there. The chime arrives, not exactly on time, but when it should. There's a softness in that, a kindness. And maybe that's why you feel calmer just thinking about it, because it reminds you that time isn't your enemy. It's a current. You don't have to fight it. You can float. You can let the moon dial spin and the bell chime as it pleases. You can let the hours stretch or compress, as long as you're present in them. And if one beautifully crafted moon tracking machine can make you feel all that, then maybe Tanaka succeeded more than he ever imagined. The silence feels thicker now, like time itself is padding softly through the room in socks. That ancient clock still ticks and drips somewhere in your imagination. A steady rhythm that feels less like a countdown and more like a lullaby. You're not in a rush, and neither is the story. Let us pause now to consider a strangely modern question. Could we build the myriad-year clock today? You might think the answer is yes. After all, we have AI nanotechnology and 3D printers that can assemble mechanical hearts with terrifying accuracy. But here's the catch. The clock wasn't just a machine, it was a philosophy. It relied on a worldview where time flowed like water, not just measured by it. To recreate it now, someone would have to do more than follow blueprints. They'd need to unlearn the 24/7 mindset, the obsession with precision, the demand for synchronization across time zones. They'd have to believe in a world where hours stretch and shrink like silk in the wind. Not a world run by seconds, but one ruled by seasons. Historians still argue whether the restoration of the clock in the late 20th century was even truly complete. Yes, the pieces work. Yes, the chimes ring. But many insist the soul of the machine, the soft calibration of water, flow, and seasonality can be fully revived in a museum under glass. Because the clock was meant to live in the world. To breathe ambient temperature. To respond to candlelight, humidity, moonlight, and rain. And without those conditions, it becomes something different. Not dead, just dormant, like a koi fish frozen under winter ice, waiting for a sun it can still remember. Which leads us to an oddly poetic truth. This machine, this masterpiece, this humbly dripping artifact was always alive, in its own way. It changed. It moved in harmony with its environment. And isn't that more than you can say for most clocks? They dominate, they dictate, they flash and beep and bark orders. But Tanaka's clock, it followed, it served, it respected the flow of time, rather than trying to leash it. One particularly beautiful feature, often overlooked, was the clock's calendar dial. Not just any calendar. It tracked the lunar solar calendar, which meant it had to know not only the day and the month, but when a leap month was added to realign the lunar cycle with the solar year, a uniquely tricky problem. Tanaka solved it with a combination of gears and sliding notches that could skip forward or extend certain cycles. Most modern engineers who examine it agree this was either the product of sheer genius or cosmic luck. Either way, the effect was the same, a clock that didn't just tell you when you were, but where you were in the grand dance of sun and moon. That's the difference. Most clocks today are blind. They just count. But this one, it sees. It sees the sky. It sees the seasons. It sees you, sitting there, falling asleep at the edge of its story. Maybe that's the quiet power of the myriad-year clock. It doesn't just mark time, it honors it. Every moment, every drip, every inch of shadow stretching across a tatami mat becomes sacred. And as your body softens with the rhythm of that thought, you start to wonder, what would your day feel like if you lived it the way this clock runs? Would you rush less? Notice more? Maybe you'd stop seeing time as the thing that slips away, and start seeing it as the thing you're floating within. Like water, like breath, like the turning of a moonlit dial in a clock built not to conquer time, but to move with it. You can feel it now, can't you? That subtle shift, the way your thoughts have slowed, your heartbeats softened, your breath longer between the notes of silence. The myriad-year clock has done its work, even if it never sat in the same room as you. And now, you find yourself curious about one last thing. What happened to Tanaka himself? You picture him in his workshop, sleeves rolled up, candlelight flickering across brass dials and water cups. A man obsessed with harmony, not efficiency. A man who saw motion as meaning. But what became of him, this engineer-philosopher? Tanaka Hazoshi died in 1881, right as Japan was hurtling full speed into the machine age. Railroads were crisscrossing the islands. Electric lines were humming. Steamships churned the Pacific. And there he was, leaving behind one of the quietest inventions in history, a clock that resisted rush. Yet Tanaka was never left behind. His name continued forward, etched into the foundation of Tanaka, which eventually evolved into one of Japan's earliest electrical engineering companies, and later, into Toshiba. Historians still debate how directly connected Tanaka's vision was to the future corporate giant. Some argue that the soul of his gentle machines vanished once mass production took over. Others believe his ethos and deep respect for Fungseirmand woven into the DNA of everything that followed. What's undeniable is that he earned an unusual nickname, Karakuri Jimin, a nod to his roots as a master of mechanical puppets. Even as he transitioned into industrial manufacturing, people remembered his Automatutha, delicate, tea-serving doll. The Archer, the clock that told time with moonlight and water. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. After his death, some claim that one of Tanaka's early mechanical dolls was buried with him. There's no evidence for this, of course, but it's the kind of poetic rumor that clings to people who build wonder for a living. The idea that he'd be buried with one of his creations feels right, like a pharaoh and his treasures. And that's the legacy he left. Not just a machine, but a way of thinking about machines. One that invites us to ask, should all technology be fast? Should it always be loud, bright, optimized? Or can it be slow, soft, and meaningful? Because that's what Tanaka gave us. A new kind of timekeeping. Not just the ability to know what time it is, but to feel it. To move through it like a breeze through bamboo, instead of a race through Modern Japanese culture still echoes with that idea. You see it in the design of Shinto shrines, where visitors cleanse their hands with ladled water. In tea ceremonies where every gesture takes on meaning. In Zen gardens, raked daily into temporary perfection, only to be reformed tomorrow. Time is not wasted. It is experienced. Tanaka's clock didn't fight the tides of modernization, but it held the memory of something older, something that might still be waiting quietly inside you. A version of yourself who's not rushing to meet the hour, but walking beside it. And here you are now, deep in the folds of night, thinking not of alarms or schedules, but of moons and seasons and dripping water. You've traveled back in time not just to 19th century Japan, but to a state of mind that resists urgency, that welcomes silence. So let's let Tanaka rest, surrounded by the invisible motion of his inventions. Let the hour pass. Let the moment linger. Let the clock tick not forward, but with you. The night has wrapped itself around you now, like a blanket spun from silence and moonlight. You don't remember the last time you checked the time, Ramanically, in a story about clocks. But that's just it, isn't it? You've stopped checking and started feeling. Tanaka would be proud. This final stretch is for you and for the ghost of that masterpiece still ticking softly in a quiet Tokyo museum, unbothered by centuries or cell phones. Picture yourself standing before it. You lean in closer, not because the clock demands it, but because it invites you. The chimes are soft enough to be mistaken for a breeze. The dials move slowly, as if unsure whether to turn or just stretch in place. There is no urgency here, no panic, only presence. The moon phase dial turns with the slow gravity of the sky. The seasonal hour markers adjust their length like a cat stretching in sunlight. The calendar disc shrugs its way toward another month. And every so often, the soft clink of water falling into its bassy invisible heartbeat, echoing into forever. This was never just a machine. It was a worldview in wood and brass, a gentle rebellion against the tyranny of the tick, a whisper to the soul that says, you are not late, you are not behind, you are right on time for your life. It makes you wonder how different things would be if we carried this rhythm with us. If we rose and rested by moonlight, adjusted our work to the length of a winter day, or celebrated the drift of seasons, not with panic, but with patience. Historians still debate whether Tanaka meant the clock to run for 1,000 years. Or whether that was simply poetic branding. But maybe it doesn't matter. Because in a way, it is still running not in mechanics, but in meaning. You feel that now. The slow, deep rhythm of it has gotten under your skin. Not ticking, but pulsing. Not rushing, but resting. And here's one final thought before you let sleep take over completely. The myriad-year clock is less about time and more about timing. Knowing when to act, when to wait, when to listen, when to sleep. So go ahead. Let yourself drift. Tanaka's clock has done its job. It's marked the hour not with precision, but with presence. It hasn't told you what to do. It has simply shown you that time isn't something to chase it. And now, the final image. A quiet room in Ido. Candlelight flickers. Outside, the wind brushes the paper walls. Inside, a boy watches his grandfather adjust a dial, listens to the drip of water, and learns that time can be kind. The boy smiles, the clock ticks, the seasons turn. So do you. And now, as the final chime fades into the quiet, let yourself melt into stillness. There's nothing more to do tonight. No bells to answer, no minutes to account for, just the soft weight of the blankets around you, the hush in the air, and the gentle echo of a water droplet falling into its place measured, graceful, and calm. Let your body sink deeper into rest. Let your breath slow. Think of the way the clock moved not in haste, but with care. That's how you get to move now. You don't need to run toward the next moment. You're already there. Let the memories of gears and dials and dripping water recede like a low tide pulling back from the shore. All those little moving parts did their work, and now they rest. just like you. You've traveled across centuries, wandered through soft candlelit workshops, followed the sound of time told in moonlight and patience. And now, the journey is over. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. Let go of the day behind you. Let go of the clocks in your world. For now, there is only peace, only breath, only the slow rotation of the stars above, the flow of water beneath, and the warmth of sleep curling close around you. You're not late. You're not early. You're exactly where you need to be. And in this moment, in this hush, in this softness, time belongs to you. Good night.